do you think there should be efforts towards empowering the local population to come up with ideas because they understand the technology and they understand what the issues are? And how would we go about doing that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's almost as if you're a plant in the audience. So when we first started the EpiSurveyor project, we had American programmers working on it because we didn't think to do anything else. And when those American programmers understandably they went off to work on more lucrative projects, and we were forced to find other programmers. I was talking with an African friend of mine who said, a Kenyan friend of mine who said, well, the project's mostly in Africa. Why don't you get African programmers? And I felt like an idiot, right? Because it hadn't even occurred to me. I mean, I work in Africa all the time. It hadn't even occurred to me. And of course, we found that yes, in fact, there are hubs of programming. In fact, MIT has a program with the University of Nairobi specifically for mobile programming. And so we are now, actually, we've set up an office in Nairobi, and part of the idea of that office, under the auspices of an initiative we have called Coded in Country, the idea there is exactly what the gentleman was suggesting, which is, I'd summarize by saying, I think people all over the place need to have the means to be able to produce software code, because producing your own programs really is the key, I think. Not everyone, obviously, in the population, but there have to be people who can do this. If you can't write your own code, you can't make new programs. You can't take the great ideas, or you can't get someone else to write it. You can't take these great ideas and make them into reality. The problem is now, again, like that map I showed, most of the code writing, now we have people who can consume information that we put on, maybe even produce information, but there's not a lot of coding in those countries. So in our Nairobi office, the whole point there is to recognize that, one, we want them to, of course, code EpiSurveyor and the other projects we're working on. We have to get that stuff done. But another portion of their time is spent just coming up with what they think are good ideas, a la the program at Google, which gives people free time to basically use the facilities and try and think of ways that they can do that. Because we really know that, I mean, as hard as I try and as well-meaning as I try to be, I am not going to come up with all the good ideas for what you do in sub-Saharan Africa. I am not of that place. And I don't know it well enough to think of these things. And I'm sure even right now, there are many, many good ideas going undone, going unaccomplished, going unfunded. In fact, not even probably being acknowledged outside of someone's head simply because they don't have the means to make those things real. I really think it's key to build up programming capacity in these places. Yes? I don't know if I'm supposed to be calling on people or they.
Here at Eureka Fest for the Invent teams, we're having a workshop to help sort of think through all the key commercialization steps needed to take their invention from where it presently is all the way to commercialization success. And although what you have is a nonprofit, can you describe the original inception of the idea and the critical sort of high-level next steps that you've taken from the thinking through, attracting the key players on your team, raising funds, the critical milestones up to now, and then perhaps just a couple of steps that you envision, the key steps next?
Yeah, you know, I'm really reluctant to give people advice on how to do this because I feel like the way that we did it was to sequentially make every possible mistake that you could make. And I was asked to speak at Stanford Business School, which is really a ludicrous idea. And you know, I told people, you know, some people I think you start something because you're really thinking about commercialization right off, and which in a way is thinking about sustainability, really. And I think for me particularly, that was not really the case. What I was thinking about was, as I've talked about with Mark so many times, thinking about problems that need solving and passionately wanting to solve those problems. And I think it's only after you realize that it can become something that's no longer a dream, but you actually have a shot at making it real, as has happened with EpiSurveyor, then you start thinking about, oh my God, I don't want the baby to die. And you start thinking about those steps that you need to take. Rose and I have gone back and forth many, many times about for-profit, non-profit, what should we be, how should we constitute ourselves. I've said many times, at the level of revenue that we have at Datadyne, there is no excess revenue, and so what the IRS does with our excess revenue at the end of the year is not of tremendous importance. So for us, it doesn't really matter at this point whether we are for-profit, non-profit. Everybody's got to make revenue. I will say, right now, EpiSurveyor is mostly grant-funded. We're very grateful for that grant support, but I do see a bit of a problem with the grant support in the sense that, I mean, it's always great to get money, but the problem, I think, gets back to that issue about training people how to code in those countries and really giving a voice to the people in those countries, because I've thought many times, I have been talking to grant funders who do not know anything about technology, and they do not know anything about public health, and they are the decision maker as to whether our projects will continue. And as much as I'm trying to pay attention to people in Kenya who are public health officers on the front line wanting to tell me exactly what they need, I know that I must pay attention to that grant funder. And that's a bit of a problem. So we have thought about, is there a way in which, in fact, we could monetize the product by selling those services to the people who are on the front line at some kind of a price that they could afford, not only to get another source of revenue, but to give them the real voice. You know, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And right now, it is not the user, it is not the end user who pays the piper. And frankly, I think that's why the history of technology projects in developing countries is a history largely of failure, because I think we're not paying attention to the right people.
So do most people in Africa have cell phones, or are you going to make distribution efforts for cell phones?
Yeah, I am dead set against distributing anything in terms of distributing hardware. And I think the reason is because we can't anticipate the kind of hardware they want, and not to mention the fact that, you know, distributing cell phones in Africa would be like, you know, going to Hurricane Katrina and distributing buckets of water or wind. The fact is that the cell phones, as I said, I may not have mentioned, but Africa for the past 10 years has been the fastest growing cell phone adoption place on the planet, starting from a very low base, but 60 to 70% year-over-year growth. Now that 60 to 70% year-over-year growth for the last 5 years has brought them to about an overall level of about 30 to 40% penetration. Right? So the short answer to your question, does everyone in Africa have a cell phone, is no, they don't. 30 to 40% of people do. However, again, there's no sign that this phenomenon is abating or that fewer people are buying them. I mean, the curve is just asymptotic. So for us, I think what we're choosing to focus on right now is say, well, look, while everyone doesn't have a cell phone, key groups have cell phones. School teachers all have cell phones. Basically, anybody who's got a regular job, a regular source of income, has got a cell phone. And there's so much, again, as a public health person, there's so much we can do just addressing those public health people who have cell phones that we're sort of focusing on that. But again, the world I'm talking about where everyone's got a cell phone, literally everyone, you think if you go to capital cities that it's here, and it's not quite here. But I firmly believe it is coming. Oh, someone's pointing at the guy in front of her.
First of all, thank you very much. I'm wondering, once we reach the point where the entire world has cell phones and everybody's connected to this worldwide cell phone network, doesn't that sort of open up ourselves in a way that we're very exposed to corporations and to governments who then have a way that they can always reach us? And so now with the World Wide Web, I can turn off my computer when I don't want somebody reaching me. But can I always turn off my cell phone? Well, no, I need it, possibly need it for an emergency, and so I need to have it on. Well, now you have corporations who can text me ads all the time, and you get to a point where you're too exposed.
I think, first of all, it's a great point and a great question. I think the safest thing to do is always stay at home with the door bolted. And yet at the same time, we recognize that travel broadens the mind, and so we try to get out and seek new ideas, thereby exposing us to all the hazards of travel and leaving the house. And I think with this, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, anyone who's been in a restaurant where someone is talking loudly on the cell phone understands that we have not yet developed a set of etiquette or a set of controls or a set of senses. When do we use cell phones? When do we not? Is it okay to ever turn your cell phone off? I have people all the time who, my cell phone rings, they hear it vibrating, they're like, aren't you going to answer that? I'm like, no. What if it's an emergency? What kind of an emergency? Right? We're all we become enslaved to this undoubtedly very useful technology. I think there's going to be a lot of hot debate about issues of privacy, people wanting to, I'm sure there's going to be a backlash of people who want to basically get off the grid. I know sometimes I feel that way. Yeah, I think these are exactly the kind of questions people are going to think about moving forward. I don't think any technology is ever an unalloyed good, right? I mean, just the telephone itself, the automobile, look at all the car accidents people have.